There's something about carrying the same thing for years, the same prayer, the same burden, the same wound, the same opposition, the same situation that keeps showing back up every time you think you finally made peace with it. And after a while, that produces a quiet kind of exhaustion. Not the kind that makes you quit, but I'm talking about the kind that has you sitting in the car a few extra minutes before you go inside. The kind that keeps you staring at the ceiling at night. The kind that makes you wonder if anybody truly understands the weight you've been carrying. The kind that has you crying prayers you don't even have the words for anymore. Listen, you've been strong for so long. You've carried it for too long. And deep down, you know this ain't something that you can fix. This is something that only God can change. And most people never see that part. They just see you keep showing up. They see the smile. They see you functioning. But what they don't see is the weight you've been carrying behind the scenes. And what God has been showing me lately is that feeling is more human than most people want to admit. But if you're not careful, you'll become so focused on the pressure that you'll completely miss what God is producing through it. And I've been locked into 1 Samuel lately. And for some reason, I can't get away from Hannah. Everybody talks about Samuel. Everybody talks about the miracle. Everybody talks about the answered prayer. And I understand why. But what I can't get past is the years before the miracle ever arrived. Here's Hannah, year after year, carrying the same pain. Year after year, showing up to worship, carrying something that she couldn't fix. Year after year, believing God while staring at the circumstances that hadn't changed. Year after year, watching other people receive the very thing that she'd been praying for. And then you got Penaniah, constantly provoking, constantly mocking, constantly reminding her of what she didn't have, constantly touching the wound. Anybody know what that feels like? When life keeps touching the wound, the betrayal you thought you healed from, the rejection you thought you moved past, the disappointment you thought you buried, the prayer that you thought would have been answered by now, the relationship, the diagnosis, the financial pressure, the loneliness, the thing you gave to God 100 times, yet somehow it keeps finding its way back to the surface, constantly touching the wound. Man, that's where Hannah lived, year after year, and eventually she reaches a breaking point. Not a breaking point away from God, a breaking point that drove her to God. She walks into the temple and pours her soul out before Him. No more pretending, no more acting strong, no more carrying it by herself. Man, she's weeping, she's praying, she's pouring everything out before God. So deeply, in fact, that Eli the priest looks at her and assumes she's drunk. And that part hit me because sometimes people will misinterpret what they don't understand. They'll see your tears and call it weakness. They'll see your intensity and call it too much. They'll see your dependence on God and they'll think you lost your mind because they can see the outward expression, but they can't hear the conversation taking place between you and God. They don't know what you've been carrying. They don't know what you've been fighting. They don't know what you survived. And this is where God showed me something. Penaniah thought she was winning. The enemy thought he was winning. The mockery thought it was winning. The delay thought it was winning. The exhaustion thought it was winning. Every time that wound got touched, the enemy thought that he was pushing Hananiah further away from her promise. But what he didn't realize is he was pushing her straight into the presence of God. And here's the part that changed everything for me. Penaniah don't get all the credit. Yeah, the pressure was real. The wound was real. The humiliation was real. But Hannah still had a choice. That pain could have made her bitter. That pain could have hardened her heart. That pain could have driven her away from God. But instead, she surrendered. And that's where the whole story changes. Because in the kingdom, surrender ain't weakness. Surrender is power. Surrender is the posture where God can finally place in your hands what He couldn't trust with your flesh. Surrender is where striving dies. It's where control dies. It's where pride dies. Self-reliance dies. And that's where dependence on God is born. See, the enemy thought that he was creating weakness, but God was creating surrender. The enemy thought that he was creating discouragement, God was creating dependence. The enemy thought that he was stopping destiny, but God was positioning Hannah for it, because Hannah eventually reaches a place where she says, Lord, if you give me a son, I'll give him back to you. Do you hear that? The blessing was no longer about her fulfillment. Now it was about God's purpose. And that's when everything shifted. Hannah thought that she was praying for a son. God was preparing a prophet. Hannah thought this season was about what she wanted. But God knew that this season was about what He wanted to bring through her. See, Samuel would anoint kings. Samuel would shift a nation. Samuel would become a voice for a generation. And all of it was being formed in a season that looked like delay. And that's why I'm convinced of something. Every time the enemy touched the womb, Hannah went back to God. Every time the pressure increased, she went back to God. Every time the pain resurfaced, she went back to God. Every time the disappointment showed up again, she went back to God. The very thing that was supposed to separate her from God became the thing that drove her deeper into His presence. And that's what the enemy never seems to understand, goofy. When a person refuses to become bitter, when a person refuses to quit, when a person refuses to let pain harden their heart, every attack becomes promotion. Every battle becomes preparation. Every wound becomes a doorway into deeper surrender. And I feel this so strongly for somebody right now. You've been staring at the delay. You've been staring at the pressure. You've been staring at the opposition. You've been staring at the thing that hasn't changed. But God is telling you to stop measuring your life by what hasn't happened yet. Look at who you're becoming. Look at the wisdom you've gained. Look at the strength you've gained. Look at the discernment that you've gained. Look at the intimacy with God that you've gained. Look at the things that He's healed in you. Look at the things that He's revealed to you. Look at the things that He's delivered you from. Because what feels like delay has not been wasted. What feels like opposition has not been wasted. My friend, what feels like silence has not been wasted. God has been forming something in you this entire time. And I believe there are people listening to this right now who are standing in their Hannah season. You've been carrying it for years. You've cried over it. You've prayed over it. You've wrestled with it. You laid awake thinking about it. And you're tired. But hear me out. God has not forgotten you. God has not abandoned you. God has not overlooked you. And the thing that keeps touching the womb will not have the final say. The thing that keeps mocking you will not have the final say. The thing that keeps trying to convince you nothing is changing will not have the final say. Because the same God who was working in Hannah's waiting is the same God that's working in yours. The same God who was forming Hannah in the pressure is the same God who's forming you in yours. The same God who was preparing something bigger than Hannah could see is preparing something bigger than you can see. So don't despise this season. Don't waste this season. Don't run from this season. Let it drive you deeper. Let it drive you into surrender. Let it drive you into the holy presence of God. Because one day you're going to look back and realize that what felt like the greatest attack against your life became the very thing that God used to position you for the purpose that He had planned for all along.